we are living in very, very dangerous times. What is happening in the Middle East, one hopes remains in the Middle East, but there is a very big danger that it will spread from outside the Middle East. What happened on the 7th of October in Israel is something which I don't think any country is going to take lying down. They will hit back. They are already hitting back, but I think they are resolved to cleaning out Gaza from Hamas. And even more seriously, making the mistake of trusting Pakistan. The stated objective of destroying Hamas, although I don't think it is going to be possible to destroy Hamas for a very simple reason. Iran is trying to emerge as the big boy in the region, as the crusading power fighting for Muslim rights. Let me just start with a clarification. These are very fraught times, these are very polarized times. And I think it's very important to clarify that the color of the shirt I'm wearing has nothing to do with my political views, and it's not a political statement. But having said that, I think we are living in very, very dangerous times. What is happening in the Middle East, one hopes remains in the Middle East, but there is a very big danger that it will spread from outside the Middle East and probably engulf the wider region. As we are speaking, there is an imminent invasion of Israeli troops going into Gaza to clean up Hamas, to destroy them, as is the objective, stated objective. But it's been some time since the Israeli forces have been mobilized, and people are wondering because virtually every night there is speculation that the forces will move in tonight. The Israelis are taking their time. Now this could be for 3 or 4 reasons. One is, of course, there's been a lot of diplomatic there's a lot of diplomacy taking place. A lot of world leaders have been making a beeline for Israel to express solidarity with the government out there, and it would be quite improper if an invasion like this was to start while these tours were going on. That could be one. Another one could be for operational reasons, that the forces are not entirely ready. They are still waiting for some more preparations to be completed before they move in. A third reason could be strategic. That there is a real danger that this conflict will not remain limited to Gaza. It could spread to the surrounding areas in the north with Lebanon, where the Hezbollah has been taking, at least there have been skirmishes going on. It could just as well spread to Syria because there is a large presence of Hezbollah out there. And that front could open up. There is a very real danger of the entire West Bank going up in flames, and the Israeli security forces might be forced to step in and control the situation there. And so I think they have to take into account the entire strategic aspect of a movement like this, because whatever else you might say, and there's a lot of fake information, fake narratives being built around this conflict. We saw that in the case of the alleged bombing of a hospital in Gaza, which was never really bombed. The hospital is still standing, but there were Western media, which is supposed to be the gold standard of media. I don't know what kind of gold they are selling. But the Western media, for example, all the so-called liberal, woke Western media had immediately started parroting the Hamas line of the number of casualties, and the actual casualties, if at all there were any, from the projectile that fell in the parking lot of that hospital, was probably a small fraction of the numbers that have been bandied about. So, but what has happened is that the Arab street or the Muslim street around the world including in the West, has kind of got all riled up, and there is a lot of tension in many of these countries, which could destabilize these countries. So there is that factor that has to be taken into account. And finally, I think there could be a humanitarian reason for the delay, and that humanitarian reason is not just about supplies going in, but also about the Israelis wanting to minimize civilian casualties, the collateral damage that will be inevitable when a ground invasion takes place. And they would want the maximum number of people to move out of the areas which they are planning to target. But I think it is inevitable that the Israeli forces will move in, because once you mobilize an army, you can't keep it endlessly on the standby and keep taking time. Either then you have to start demobilizing, or you have to move in. It is just not feasible and practical. Although we did it way back, in 2001, when Op Parakram happened, and the parliament was attacked by Pakistani terrorists. We had a very, very prolonged mobilization, and that caused a lot of problems. I don't think the Israelis will go in for something like that. So the invasion is, of course, inevitable. And the Israelis feel that they have a just cause, and they do have a cause, because what happened on the 7th of October in Israel is something which I don't think any country is going to take lying down. They will hit back. They are already hitting back, but I think they are resolved to cleaning out Gaza from Hamas, or liberating, if you will. I know a lot of people will get riled up with the choice of words I'm using, but I think Gaza needs to be liberated from Hamas. So that is going to happen. But the question is, what is the end game? Have the Israelis actually thought this through? One can understand their anger for wanting, and that is probably fueling this entire military operation. But what is the end game? Have they thought this through? Will they get bogged down in a place like Gaza? Of course, comparisons with places like Afghanistan are odious, simply because those are completely different geographies, completely different terrains, and there were a lot of mistakes that were made by the Americans, not the least of which was to shift the eye, to take the eye off the ball and move into Iraq, thinking that they've cleaned up Afghanistan, and even more seriously making the mistake of trusting Pakistan. So I don't think anybody should compare what the Israelis are going to do in a very tiny geography of Gaza with what happened in Afghanistan and other places. But even then, there are other instances where cities have been, people have tried to occupy cities and have got bogged down. Surely the Israelis would have at least thought this part through. But even if they are successful and they manage to achieve the stated objective of destroying Hamas, although I don't think it is going to be possible to destroy Hamas for a very simple reason. Hamas as an organization can, of course, be severely degraded, even dismantled completely. But Hamas is also an idea and an ideology. It's not very different from Al-Qaeda, ISIS, or any of the other Islamist terror groups. And to that extent, I don't think that ideology is going to go anywhere, even if the Israelis were to occupy Gaza. And even Hamas in itself, a lot of their top leadership is not even in Gaza anymore. They never were. They are in living very, very comfortable and luxurious lives in places like Qatar. They have received sanctuary in Syria, in Iran, in Lebanon. So they are, it's kind of spread out, and it will be quite a long haul if decapitation is part of the objective of destroying Hamas. And even if Hamas goes away tomorrow, there could be something else even more virulent and vicious than it, which could replace it. So one is that factor. What are the Israelis and their partners in this conflict planning to do about this particular factor? Look, the world got an opportunity after 9/11 when this issue, this ideological conflict, could have been addressed, but it was blown. It was blown by the mad political correctness in the West. The kind of liberal woke kind of nonsense which goes on in the West, and that opportunity was completely blown apart. This might be yet another opportunity, and we will have to wait and see whether this opportunity is going to be used to actually address the ideological conflict which is behind much of the radicalism. There are of course political reasons, but I don't think political reasons can ever become a justification. But what actually has happened is that most of these leftists and the woke crowd in universities in the West have actually normalized terrorism. They've justified it. They've downplayed the virulence of Islamic radicalism. So this is an opportunity, and we'll have to wait and see how this is going to be addressed going forward. Then the thing is that if this war, how long will this war continue? Is this going to be an endless war, or will the Israelis be able to make it short and swift and clean it up in a matter of a couple of weeks at best, or will they get bogged down? And how much are the civilian casualties going to be? Because as the operation proceeds, there will be civilian casualties. There will be all those horrific images, some real, many of them fake, that will be going around the cyberspace, that will be riling up a lot of people, that will be creating a lot of pressure on the Arab street, on Arab governments, on Muslim or Islamic governments rather. And you cannot simply ignore that fact and say that, okay, that's their problem. No, it's not their problem, because it could start severely destabilizing governments and the region. So it has to be swift, it has to be quick, and it has to be done with minimum casualties, which is easier said than done. But the thing is, even if this happens, what after that? What happens the day after? What is the game plan on that particular aspect of it? Now, there is a best case scenario, and the best case scenario is that this conflict remains limited to Gaza. That there will be some noise, there will be some minor skirmishes along other fronts in Israel, but they'll be contained. Nobody will push the envelope on that. Arab governments or Islamic governments will make some noises, but ultimately many of them are not really very well disposed towards Hamas. Many of them also realize that what Hamas has done, perhaps with the nod and a wink or support from countries like Iran, is something that has actually planted a kind of a minefield around them and literally trapped them. Because these countries did not want any truck with Hamas. They were trying to move to a completely new paradigm. They were trying to reconcile with Israel. They were trying to use the reconciliation process and the recognition of Israel as a way to push forward with the peace process. It would have been a bit of a long haul, but nevertheless, that is the direction in which they wanted to push things, and they wanted to bring in many reforms in their own governments, and all of that has got kind of sabotaged by what Hamas has done. Iran is trying to emerge as the big boy in the region, as the crusading power, fighting for Muslim rights, representing Muslim public opinion around the world, and this could is creating problems for many of the other governments, and surely they don't like what is happening. So while they will make a bit of a noise about what Israel does, the best case scenario is that that's all that happens from their side. And then, so Israel goes in, it remains limited, there is minimum destabilization in the region, even though, and we'll come to that in the worst case scenario, Iran and their proxies are trying to instigate many players, many non-state actors in the region or para-state actors in the region to widen this war. But let us assume for a moment that does not happen. They are not successful, and it remains limited. Gaza is cleaned up. There is no Hamas left. But then what does Israel do? Does it occupy the place? Somebody has said that they might make buffer zones. How do you make a buffer zone in a region as small as Gaza? I can understand buffer zones in much bigger geographies, but how do you make a buffer zone in Gaza? What exactly does anybody mean by a buffer zone? So that is one question. How do you administer the area? That will be the second question. What do you do about more than 2 million, 2.5 million people, many of them who will be stuck in that territory because nobody is opening their doors for these people? What do you do with these people, many of them who are going to be hostile? So I think those are serious questions that will come about. It is quite possible, and this is, I'm talking about the best case scenario, that Israel moves in, cleans it up, then hands over the authority to the Palestinian Authority on the West Bank, which is again not exactly a very functional kind of an outfit. It's pretty dysfunctional if you look at it closely, but you give it to them. Many of the Arab states who abhor Hamas and other organizations like that kind of come in with aid. They try and rebuild Gaza. They make sure that there is no terror organization or terror infrastructure left in Gaza. The reconciliation restarts, and what also restarts is the peace process between Israel and Palestine. And again, I'm talking about the best case scenario, which very often does not really play out that way. Negotiations take place, the process starts once again, certain guarantees are given, iron cast guarantees are given to ensure Israel's security, and a two-state solution of sorts is worked out. Maybe it pans out over 15-20 years. There is, you have a certain roadmap on how things will move forward from here, and things start settling down. There is a worst case scenario, and in the worst case scenario, this war does not remain limited to Gaza. It expands. Some of the non-state and para-state actors come into play. Already we've seen missiles being or rockets being fired at American targets in Syria, in other parts of the Middle East. There are non-state actors in Iraq and other places which are targeting the Americans. The Hezbollah is threatening to open another front. It's probably, as a colleague of mine had said earlier, it probably suffering from FOMO, or the fear of missing out, and feeling that maybe Hamas has become the big dude in town and they are kind of being left out. So they want to put in their share, and they are in many ways more powerful than Hamas in terms of resources, in terms of manpower, in terms of room for maneuver, and in terms of the kind of support that they received from Iran. So there is that factor which could come into play, and if organizations like in Iraq and other places come into play, then this becomes a wider war. And if American installations are targeted, their ships or their soldiers, and the Americans jump into the fray, then it becomes a kind of a domino effect. Other parties jump in. We don't know how the rest of the world is going to react to what Iran is doing. And then there would be other players like the Russians and the Chinese who would also want to have some kind of a say, might want to play some spoiler role, and for understandable reasons, because they are in a kind of a geopolitical, geostrategic contestation with the West, and this is an opportunity for them. And this thing starts expanding, and then nobody knows how far it expands, how wide it expands, and what one can predict with a fair degree of certainty is that it will be massively disruptive. That is where it comes to India. India for now has adopted a pretty nuanced position, very firmly standing with Israel on the issue of terrorism. At the same time, we haven't given up on the two-state solution. We have reaffirmed that we stand for a two-state solution, a negotiated solution. The Prime Minister has spoken to the President of the Palestinian Authority. He's also spoken to, of course, the Israeli Prime Minister. We've assured Iran of all support. We've promised humanitarian assistance to the Palestinians. So, in a sense, we've walked that tightrope where we have not conflated Palestinian rights and aspirations with what Hamas has done, like many of the people across the world have done, who have actually defended Hamas's action because they are rooting in favor of a two-state solution or a Palestinian state. In fact, many of them actually make no bones about the fact that they are seeking the complete extermination of Jews, because they stand, when they mouth that slogan from the river to the sea, basically what they are saying is that they don't recognize the right of existence of Israel, and India is not on that page. India, in fact, has a completely different view of what is happening. But if this war expands, then what happens to us? There will be an impact on our economy because we could see a massive spike in energy prices because this is, the hub of international energy, oil and gas, and those prices could start going up. I don't see any kind of an embargo being put of the sorts which happened in the 70s, but just the sheer tension in the region is going to raise oil prices. There could be, if the war widens, there could be disruption in supplies, and that will have a massive impact on India. So the question is, do we have our strategic reserve up and ready? Can we do something to conserve our consumption of oil and gas? Can we think of certain things that we will put in play? And we've got the experience, for example, of the pandemic when work from home became a thing, and we managed to cut down on our oil consumption. Can we do something like that if things reach such a pass? Is there a game plan on how we are going to handle the economic fallout in terms of our energy security and the economic fallout in terms of, for example, our trade flows go through that region to the West. There is then the issue of our diaspora, which is in many of these countries. How do we ensure their safety? It's not going to be possible to pull out the entire diaspora in places like Saudi Arabia, UAE and other parts of the Middle East. We can't do that. It is one thing to pull out 10, 20,000 people, 100,000 people, but when you are talking in terms of millions, it's virtually impossible. So there will be that particular factor. There will be a domestic challenge because there is a sizable Muslim population in India, in which there is a lot of disquiet over what's happening in Palestine, partly for emotional reasons, partly for reasons that they've not got the correct information, or where they are getting the information from are sources which are unreliable, and maybe that could become a bit of an issue going forward. So we'll have to handle that. And then, of course, there is going to be the diplomatic challenge. How do we balance our friendship with Israel and our very strategic relationship with Israel with a very profitable strategic relationship with many of the Arab states, with whom our relations have improved by leaps and bounds over the last 8-9 years. And there were some very big and very ambitious projects that we were planning to do together. Massive investment flows were taking place, financial flows were taking place. So we'll have to balance those things. We will have to balance our traditional relations with the Arab world with our opposition to terrorism in all its forms and manifestations. So how do we walk that diplomatic tightrope? And then if it is a wider war, will we get dragged in? Will we get pulled in even if we don't want? For example, we've signed some foundational agreements with the Americans, and if the Americans get into the fray and they get into a hot war, then what happens to all the logistics and other support that we've signed an agreement with them? Will we keep neutrality and still provide all those services, repairs and other services to the American military if it gets into the fray? So I think these are going to be very serious issues that could come forward in the worst case scenario. So fingers crossed that the worst case scenario does not happen. Fingers crossed that the best case scenario does happen, but realism tells us that the best case scenario often does not happen. What might happen is some parts of the worst case scenario and some parts of the best case scenario, and then if international diplomacy is up to the task, they can try and bring some kind of stability back in the region. But that stability for now has gone up in smoke and is likely to go up in smoke, because things are likely to worsen before they get any better. And it's that transition where they are getting worse, on how that plays out in various countries, on the various streets of various countries, in the political halls of various countries. How that plays out, I think, will be critical to what happens next in the world.